This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the mind of business leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
As a leader, I think one of our superpowers has to be the ability to learn. There's a saying, there's a quote, a famous quote attributed to a former head of planning at Royal Dutch Shell years ago. It's got nothing to do with AI. And he said something along the line of, the ability to learn faster than your competitors might be the only sustainable advantage you have in the future. And that quote resonates with me because even as an executive, when I think of myself as a CEO of my career, I'm competing ultimately with other, companies out there, other executives who would want to do what I do for my organization or for any other organization I want to do it at. So I have to be able to learn fast. So accelerated learning is key. So every person, every executive has to figure out how to learn.
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences, and insights at edsxevents.com. Bashir Agboola, Chief Technology Officer and Associate CIO at Hospital for Special Surgery. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to share my experiences with your audience.
And in terms of your experiences, what can you tell me about the work that HSS, the Hospital for Special Surgery, does and about the work that you do there?
Yeah, so HSS, Hospital for Special Surgery, is the world's leading musculoskeletal care institution. We are an academic medical institution focused on musculoskeletal care, orthopedics, ranked number one in the United States for the 15th year in a row, globally for the fourth year in a row. It's been around many years. We're about 161 years old as an institution.
Wow. And
we're the preeminent place to come to for care around mobility and pain. My role in the organization, I fancy myself to be someone that enables organizations to use technology for strategic differentiation and competitive advantage. So my role in the organization as a chief technology officer deals with helping with technology strategy that helps to advance the goals of the organization, as well as enabling that the day-to-day technology infrastructure, technology solutions that's needed to really run any modern enterprise.
Important work that the hospital does and important work that you do there as well to enable the important work that the hospital does there. And you speak there about how you see your role as enabling the organization through the use of technology, whether it's competitive advantage, whether it's to be as good as they can be and to serve patients' needs as well as they can. That's a core part of your work. And of course, in a technology strategy and leadership role, it's very difficult to ignore those two letters that are in almost every conversation at the moment, which is AI. Whether you choose to define AI as artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence or any of the other things that vendors and journalists come up with. From a leadership point of view, from what you, as you say, what you bring to the organization here, I'm interested in how AI changes how you lead. How do you see leadership changing as AI becomes more prevalent in the workplace?
So AI is really redefining the competitive landscape in many industries, healthcare included. AI is speeding the rate of innovation in many ways, whether it's drug discovery, clinical trials, and also it's creating new operating models within enterprises and allowing new entrants into industries that traditionally would have required significant capital outlay or significant people resource. So now you have many digital health organizations coming into the industry, startups that are focused on addressing some of the challenges that we've had in healthcare for so long, using AI and data for predictive analytics to identify what care protocols are most effective for which demography of society, to advance drug discovery. So that means that established practitioners in the industry like ourselves also have to learn and step up. And otherwise, we risk being disrupted massively by what I would call the digital native healthcare companies that are coming up in different aspects of our industry. And so just from a purely competitive standpoint, any organization that's not looking at how they can leverage AI for strategic advantage and how it can help, whether it's changing your cost structure, whether it's creating efficiencies in how decisions are made within your organization, whether it's shrinking the gap between you and the customer base that you serve. If you're not looking at that, the organization would be facing some existential challenges in the near future.
Yeah, it's difficult to ignore, isn't it? And as much as you might not feel as though AI is something that you necessarily personally want to invest in, there's all kinds of people are scared of this stuff. The fact is that if you aren't investing in it, if you don't have a strong awareness of what others around you are doing, then you will be overtaken. There will be challengers who are going to overtake you by using AI tools, having those up their sleeve.
Yeah, and I like the fact that often when we have conversations like this, people remind us that there have been other pivotal moments in history when a new technology comes out and at least matures to a point where it's now very applicable. And you can talk about whether it's electricity, whether it's automation in some forms or the other. Yes, that is true, but the one distinction that I like to make about this current pivot that we're all making is the fact that the rate of change, if you think about how long it took for internet adoption to occur, it took, even though it seemed fast, but it took a fair number of years before we went to, having access to internet. And then before digital platforms were created that enabled online banking and e-commerce and all that. It took a few years, right? But there's a lot that's happening so fast with, in particular, generative AI in that space that's really shrinking the adoption window. So we have to respond a lot faster to this disruption than perhaps we've had to historically at other moments of disruption. So just a key distinction there from prior changes in technology.
Yeah, you could argue that the point when the World Wide Web came along, early 90s, for example, obviously there was a bit of a boom around the turn of the millennium, that dot-com boom, but it wasn't until 20 years later when mobile devices brought that World Wide Web, brought the internet to our pocket, that really it became this inflection point, as you put it there.
Exactly.
A word that you put in there, disrupt, and really just coming back to understanding the type of place that we're at right now, you kind of need to be in a position of disrupting yourself, because if you don't disrupt yourself by integrating AI, by understanding what the market is bringing, then there will be others who disrupt you. And coming back to the leadership role, talk to me about obviously having an understanding of the market, having an understanding of the capabilities. But in terms of the leadership part itself, how is AI disrupting the leadership role? What is AI bringing to you as a leader to help you, to disrupt you, to at least change how you lead your function within an organization?
So this is one area that I don't think has gotten enough attention. I mean, we talk a lot about how AI could disrupt our business models, change our operating model in our companies, introduce new people to the industry and all that. I don't think we've talked enough about how we as leaders can be disrupted or need to disrupt ourselves relative to the opportunities and challenges of AI. So if you think about what makes leaders valuable to the organizations, besides things like their domain expertise and experience, having worked in a particular industry and all that, part of what makes leaders valuable is the ability to build relationships across their organizations. So that piece isn't being disrupted, at least not yet, not directly. But the other part of the advantage that leaders have, which is the domain experience that they've honed over decades of working in that industry and knowing the regulations and then also being able to make decisions, which is one of the key things that leaders do. Decision making is one of the things leaders do. We rely on data, and we rely on our intuition, honed over years of doing the same thing. Now, that piece, the decision making, has been disrupted by AI, because all of a sudden now, perhaps you still need to trust your intuition, you still need to use your intuition, but now you have data to back up or disprove your intuition a lot faster than you could ever have done it. Whereas in the past, I might just trust my gut and act on something because I couldn't wait on data for that, because then, I would be experiencing analysis paralysis. But now, with what AI can do, you have faster access to data analysis in matter of minutes, not weeks. And so, as a leader, that aspect of our jobs is not so valuable to the organization anymore, because now maybe you don't need a business leader who's spent 25 years in the industry for that purpose. So it's shifting the value of the executive in the organization from some of the more functional capabilities that they've had to more of the relationship aspect of leadership.
Yeah. It's understanding what is unique about what a human brings to the role there. And exactly. Understanding the data, going on a gut and having 25 years worth of experience enables you to have some insight in the decisions that you make, the consequences, the unintended consequences, all of that sort of stuff. But when you've got data that can support that could superpower your decision making, but it could also disrupt it as well. Yes. I was chatting with somebody yesterday, a friend of mine who's fairly senior in the reinsurance industry here in the UK. And I was asking him about the role that AI enables him to play. And he was talking along similar lines about the ability to really assimilate a lot of data that wouldn't have been impossible beforehand, but literally would have taken years to come to the same conclusions. But the interface with AI, you no longer need to have a PhD in SQL queries, or you are able to type something into a chat bot type interface and create an incredibly powerful query. And that has been one of the real revolutions, one of the big disruptors here, that it means that this powerful stuff is now available to everybody, no matter who you are.
Think about the contraction of time in decision making. Whereas in the past, you might have the analysts on your team go work on some reports, create a dashboard, and present some analysis to you. It could take them anywhere from a few days to several days, depending on what the scope is. Imagine that level of result, and perhaps even better, can be put in front of you in a matter of minutes or hours. So it's contracted the decision-making time, the reaction time. So you have to be able to act faster, react faster, because your competition is doing the same. So
of course,
the race just got faster for everybody in every industry that's leveraging this technology, or that could leverage this technology.
Now, of course, as a leader, you are steering an organization, whether that's the strategy, but you are also helping to steer the workforce as well. And we've reflected on the role that AI plays in terms of disrupting what leadership is. But to what extent does leadership need to adapt when the workforce itself is AI assisted? And, well, when the workforce may well include some AI agents, for example. We're talking about agentic AI. How long is it going to be before a leader is leading a team of bots as well as brains?
Yeah. So I think the leadership has to think about how AI could change our approach to digital transformation. If you recall, a few years ago, the buzzword words for that many executives and industries had on their lips were digital transformation. We're all transforming digitally. We're looking at changing the channels through which we provide our services or products. We're looking at changing the processes within our organizations that we use to produce or operate whatever we do, and fundamentally the products themselves that we produce. So, but now think about how AI can change any of those three items. So whether it's the products that you sell or service that you sell, fundamentally AI can change that. New, change, revised, or the channel through which you offer the service, and then internal to your organization, how you do that. And so now as a leader, you have to look. So in healthcare, let me bring this home. So just so you see, for example, in healthcare, there's a lot of talk about burnout. Clinicians are burnt out. Everybody complains about not getting enough face time with the clinicians, and the clinicians are kind of like burning the candle at both ends. And so much of the focus lately around the use of AI is to leverage Gen AI to help address burnout. So with things like, for example, ambient AI, where the AI listens to the interaction between the clinician and the patient, captures the clinical documentation for review by the clinician, and then puts that in the medical record. So there are a number of technologies out there that do that today. And my organization is also looking at some of those. So that would really help clinicians. Of course, it does come with its own set of challenges, of course, like any technology, or even responding to messages from patients. That's another area that AI could help. So as a leader in an organization, looking at how identifying the opportunities within the organization where AI can be brought in to assist, whether it's the general productivity boosting capabilities of tools like Microsoft Copilot or similar Copilot technologies, or even move away from Gen AI. Let's talk about predictive analytics, which is where a lot of effort was focused on previously and still on, but they're not so sexy as Gen AI. Using predictive analytics on your healthcare data, because we have lots of data in healthcare, using predictive analytics to identify what care protocols are best suited for what kind of patients, what digital therapeutics could we develop from our data assets. So those are all things that executives have to be able to be clued into. What's happening in the technology? What are the needs within the organization? And what aren't we thinking about that we should be thinking about? It's exciting times, I must tell you. It's really exciting.
One other thing, though, that I think that executives, we all need to be clued into, though, is ethical considerations.
Yes.
And, we're talking about the capabilities. We're talking about working alongside humans. And frankly, we're talking about replacing some roles here as well as part of really the leadership element here. And also when you're talking about the usage of data there and patient data to gain insights, yes, for ultimately patient good in terms of predictive stuff there, but ethical considerations, making sure that you as a leader are treating your workforce ethically, as well as treating your highly sensitive patient data ethically as well. This could be a new area that many leaders are going to need to, in a world of AI, really take on board.
Yeah, and that's really one of the things that sort of slowed the adoption of the technology in healthcare, because, the compliance folks, every chief privacy officer in a healthcare institution, every chief legal officer, they're concerned about ethical use of AI that guarantees, equity and privacy of your data. And so, yes, these are very real concerns, and we're still learning how to do it effectively. I mean, just a few years ago, a major insurer was called out in New York State for using an algorithm that favored care for a particular demography above a different set of patient population, because it used spending as a proxy for care needs. So for example, looking at how much people spent on their healthcare and using that as a proxy for how sick they were is actually flawed, because it does not recognize the economic inequities that exist in society. So if you went with that, you would prioritize care for the more affluent members of society just because they could afford to spend more. And that was what happened with the algorithm that major insurer was using. It was not intended to be that, but it's the so-called algorithmic bias that can exist in AI. There's also biased data. Just if we're using AI against historical data that was biased to start with, it's going to skew whatever products or processes we develop from it. And so these are the challenges that exist today. And that's what's kind of like slowing adoption for us.
Yeah, there is slowing adoption. I guess this is the friction, isn't it? Between
Yes.
we can see there's a great capability, a great opportunity for you, maybe more than in other sectors, in other industries, to really have some beneficial outcomes for patients. But at the same time, you've got pulling you in the other direction, those constraints, those privacy constraints. What if this turns out not to be the right move, but we're not going to know that until further down the line? Some really interesting debates there. Obviously, in Europe, we have things like the AI Act in the EU, and there'll be lots of other legislation around in coming years as well. But it's still a bit of experimentation, to be fair. Coming back to leadership, though, Bashir, what can we do as leaders and indeed as a workforce to remain relevant? You've painted a picture of this new world that we've already set foot into. There are fears there. So what can we do to try and meet this world where it's at, stay relevant?
Yeah, so I'll start with the leader, because self-care. Self-care is important. As a leader, I think one of our superpowers has to be the ability to learn. There's a quote, a famous quote attributed to a former head of planning at Royal Dutch Shell years ago. It's got nothing to do with AI. And he said something along the line of, the ability to learn faster than your competitors might be the only sustainable advantage you have in the future. And that quote resonates with me, because even as an executive, when I think of myself as a CEO of my career, I'm competing ultimately with other, companies out there, other executives that would want to do what I do for my organization or for any other organization I want to do it at. So I have to be able to learn fast. So accelerated learning is key. So every person, every executive has to figure out how to learn. There's a lot that's changing in this landscape, and you have to be able to keep, sort of understand. So if you're a technology executive in healthcare, you need to kind of understand what are the opportunities in healthcare, what are the challenges that we have in healthcare, and what role can AI play in so you have to have a good business understanding as well as an understanding of the evolving AI landscape and see how those can be brought together. And you have to be able to do that fast and quick. If you're not able to do that, you're going to be left behind. Then similarly, organizationally, you have to educate your workforce, your peer executives in the organization, your CEO, your CFO, the C-suite members who are not necessarily so technically inclined. They understand their area of the business very well, but they might not understand this AI thing. So you have to be able to bring the education to them and help them think about how they can benefit from, the use of AI, or how their business model can be fundamentally, transformed in some ways using AI. And then your general workforce, you have to be able to enhance and empower the general workforce with productivity tools, AI-enabled productivity tools, or even across your technology stack. Whether it's your cybersecurity portfolio of tools. How can AI help you to be boost up your defenses and be more, responsive to threats as they evolve? How can AI help with that? How can AI help with automating, day-to-day IT operations? So different areas. And so again, bringing it back to the individual, and sharing some personal thoughts on some of what I do. So the day is there aren't enough hours in the day to do any of what I just talked about. So I have learned to leverage AI in many, many ways. So for example, when I go to a conference, and if I have access to the presentations from the conference, I could take a bunch of them, throw them in Notebook LM, have it generate a nice summary of the key insights from that conference. And then I use its audio podcast feature to generate a podcast that I can listen to. It's kind of like my own audiobook. When I'm on the train on my way to work, I can catch up because there just isn't enough time to read all the materials that I want to read. I use AI for summaries. I use AI if I need to put a slide deck together. I could use Microsoft Copilot in PowerPoint to quickly, put a slide deck together. So, and there's so much opportunity to leverage AI to make us stronger, to augment abilities as leaders than not. So self-care, intellectual self-care through accelerated learning, enabling your peers in the organization, your fellow leaders in the organization, to be aware, to be educated about this. And lastly, your general workforce needs to be educated and enabled as well.
It's a cliche about AI that you won't be replaced by an AI, but you will be replaced by somebody who knows how to use an AI. And that works organizationally as well as for the individual. And again, going back to that thing about definitions of AI, and I know it's a bit twee, but you're talking there about using AI to augment your intelligence. The example there, Google Notebook LLM, throwing some material at that, letting it come together, letting it put together a podcast. Now, as somebody who does a lot of podcasts, I don't want to be replaced by an AI, of course. And my experience, and I have used exactly the same workflow, and my experience is that it is very cliche. But the conversation as an aid to learning something quickly at a good level of detail, a useful level of detail, it can't be ignored. So I find it very useful indeed. Yes, the emergence of the AI tutor there. Very quickly though, Bashir, before we go, tell us about how AI is manifesting itself in where you work right now. You've touched on it a couple of times there, but along with the types of AI implementations we've been talking about, where are you seeing it at HSS and elsewhere in your part of the industry?
Yeah, so there's some of the areas that weren't so much public before because organizations were doing it in healthcare, but the public wasn't aware necessarily. So predictive analytics is actually some of the areas in which we would have the biggest bang for our bucks, so to say, in healthcare, because we have lots of data in healthcare, going back decades and decades and decades. And just being able to use AI to look at that data and find patterns in the data that we've not recognized before. New treatments. Imagine the opportunities to come up with new treatments, to speed up clinical trials, to go from drug discovery to getting the drug, available to a patient. AI could shrink that time for us. In orthopedics, in the area that my hospital plays in, imaging is key. We do all kinds of imaging. We have radiologists. We have some of the best radiologists in the world. But if you think about other parts of the world where they don't have the same access, I like to say that we have more radiologists on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where my hospital is at, than perhaps some countries in the world, and I'm not joking when I say that there's so much inequity in healthcare globally speaking. So imagine what AI can do with computer visioning, where perhaps you don't need that highly trained radiologist to review an image, at least make the first pass at it. And there have been trials where the technology is doing it as good as a well-trained radiologist. So opportunities like that, bridging the equity gap that exists in healthcare, would really allow us to bring care to more and more populations, even in the United States. There's care inequity in the United States and then globally as well. So those are some of the areas that, work's been going on for many, many years before the Gen AI craze, but now it's bringing attention to it. So predictive analytics, computer visioning, robotic surgery, we've been doing that for many years. But again, there's more focus and attention on it now. So as I said before, I'm really excited at the opportunity that the technology brings to caring for people.
My hope is that, like you, AI can be a catalyst to shrink the gap between the inequity that we see around the world, because there really is a big technology gap in some regions to other regions. There is a potential for that gap to get bigger as a result of centralization of power with regards to AI, or there is an alternative route where actually AI can really shrink that gap and create a more equal playing field around the world. I think we would both hope for that option, and we all need to make sure that the other option doesn't happen. Fascinating chatting with you, Bashir. Before we go, there's some things that we ask all of our guests here on CXO Secrets, though, and I need to put those questions to you. This is CXO Secrets, so what's your secret? If you were to put your modesty to one side for a moment, tell us what key attribute you believe has enabled you to achieve what you have.
I think it's two things, actually, two secrets. So one is really internalizing the cliche that's out there about being comfortable with discomfort. You know, I'd heard it growing up, and people say, you get comfortable, you should be comfortable with, get out of your comfort zone. But I never truly internalized that. So the moment it finally hit me that I should just be comfortable with the idea that I will be uncomfortable in certain contexts and with certain challenges, that's allowed me to take on anything I want to take on, rather than focusing on the accompanying discomfort, which was what I used to do before. Now I just focus on the goal in front of me, despite the discomfort that I'm experiencing doing it. So whether it's stepping up on the stage at a conference to speak, so doing that despite my nervousness, whether it's having a difficult conversation with a significant person, whether in a personal life or in the corporate, corporate life, having that difficult conversation, despite whatever you might be feeling about the interaction, being able to move beyond that. So that's one. So that internalizing that's really empowered me to take on things that I never thought I could take on. Then the second secret, I would say, goes back to the quote from Ari de Goos, the executive from Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, is really learning. I've figured out in many ways, and I'm still learning how to learn. But figuring out accelerated learning has allowed me, and being able to use tools and techniques. I've read books on accelerated learning. I've watched videos on it. So those two things together, being able to just move beyond discomfort to the things I need to do, and then being able to figure out how to learn very quickly, combined together, I think has been instrumental to my progress.
We do a Pass the Question here on CXO Secrets, where you get to put a question to a future guest on the show, whoever they may be. But first, we have a question for you from a previous guest on the show, our final guest at the end of season 1, in fact. And it was Wendy Ng, who is a BISO at Marks & Spencer, a big retailer here in the UK. And, well, they asked this question.
I would like to ask the next guest, how are they preparing their organization for these very pivotal changes coming with AI automation, specifically, applying this into their organizations?
Yes. So part of that is some of what I said earlier in terms of education, educating the workforce, educating the leadership in particular, the decision makers in the organization, helping to educate them. And then the other part is technology scouting, making sure you understand what's out there in terms of technology, what's enterprise grade, what's mature, what are the risks associated with it. And then also, figuring out the right partnerships that you need to have with industry, with with peers in the industry, with other organizations, and internally within your company, understanding what their needs are, bridging that gap between technology and the business. And so we're going through a major transformation in my company right now, and a lot of what we're doing has to do with, it's not AI focused, by the way, but AI is going to be part of it. But it's a whole transformation around who we are, what's made us successful thus far. We're a 161-year-old, world-class organization, but we recognize that it's what got us here isn't what's going to get us there. So we're trying to identify what's going to get us there. And that's been a big part of our focus. And we hope that AI will be part of that journey for us.
Finally, Bashir, what's the question that you would like me to put to a guest on a future episode?
One thing that I think about often is about impact. It's been a focus of mine for at least the last several years, the impact. What impact am I having? And so what I would like to ask the next guest is, when you're all, wrinkly and old and you've got enough of this rat race, what impact do you hope you would have had along the line? And do you think what you're doing now, the trajectory that you're on, will allow you to have that impact? So,
yeah, that's a question I think we should all ask ourselves anyway, to work out what that next step for ourselves is. It's been really fascinating speaking with you today, Bashir. Thank you so much indeed for sharing your thoughts on leadership, on the role that AI is playing in organizations, and indeed on the role of leadership in organizations. Keep on doing that great work that you do at HSS. But for now, Bashir Agboola, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, David. Thank you.